all I'm really going to be doing here is just kind of demoing a simple little project. So I'm going to share my screen here. And right now, what we're going to do is we're going to create a project totally from scratch. And what we're going to use is MetaMask, Hardhat, and Ethers.js. So if at any point people want to just like jump in and ask questions, feel free. I'm just going to kind of like walk through this project. So if anytime things like don't make sense, like just stop me and say like, hey, like, what are you doing? What's going on here? But if you've ever worked with like a MetaMask wallet before, then this should be fairly straightforward. This is how you will connect to any kind of blockchain and interact with in terms of like your funds. So we're going to be connecting to Avalanche specifically. And when you first create a wallet, you may have to like add the network. So you can do that by inputting data here. And the network name will be Avalanche Fuji C chain. And then you'll have an RPC URL that has to connect to the Avalanche C chain specifically. And then it has a chain ID 43113, currency symbol, AVAX, and then a block explorer, which is kind of like an ether scan that lets you connect and get analytics and data from the blockchain.
Question,
so
real quick.
Yes.
The chain ID, who makes up the chain ID? Like, how does that get, like, who, like the number, where does it come from? Does it come from a...
So it comes from the Avalanche docs. So like when I'm trying to figure out how to connect to something, that's where I go. I don't really know like who decides on that and who, whether it's like the wallets or the chains itself. It's a fantastic question that I wish I knew the answer.
Would be like number one or something, right? And then a different chain would be a different number, right? So
yeah, exactly. So usually if you just go to the docs, or if you like Google like how to connect like a MetaMask wallet to Avalanche, then you'll usually be able to find that kind of information.
Got it. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. And then are people here familiar with Vite at all? Be curious.
This is Pierre. No, I'm not familiar with it.
Okay, so are people familiar with Create React App?
I am with both.
I am. Yep.
Yeah, great. So Create React App uses something called Webpack under the hood, which is kind of what does the whole like bundling process and is what kind of turns your React app into something that can actually go onto the internet. Whereas Vite is kind of like a newer, faster, more updated version of Webpack. And it's just going to like generate a boilerplate React app for us that most of you will be pretty familiar with. Real quick, I'm just gonna...
It's a bundler, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So this is just gonna kick open a project for us. I'll open this up so you all can see what's happening here. And we'll go Yarn Dev, and I'll be using Yarn to do the, like if you use npm, same kind of thing to run our dev commands. And then we'll get open on localhost 3000. And so this is just like your kind of create a React app, right? So we have a React app, and then this is what we're going to use to connect to our smart contract. So we just change it. Hello, we see hello there, and that's our little project. Now, what we're going to do is going to actually get our contract set up. And so there's going to be a couple of dependencies we'll need to do this. The first ones are going to be .env for environment variables, and then Hardhat, which is like our development environment that allows us to deploy our smart contract. And we'll see that as we get into it. And Ethers, which is like a JavaScript library that allows you to like hook into React kind of hooks and then use that to interact with the blockchain. And then there's this Hardhat Ethers library, which kind of integrates the two of them together. But if you check out like all of these kind of tools, there's like various other libraries and various other tools that kind of do similar things, but these ones are fairly popular and standard in terms of like when you want to first get going, if you're familiar with like the JavaScript toolchain and specifically. So this is why, as someone who learned a lot of React and like Node and stuff like that, this will usually make sense to you. Now we're going to have a couple files here. The first one will be our Solidity file. So Solidity is the programming language that you use to write your smart contract. And then your smart contract is a program that lives on the blockchain. We're then going to have this deploy file, and this is the Hardhat file that actually takes this contract and then deploys it for you and will allow you to deploy similar contracts to different chains. So we can specify deploy this to the Ethereum chain or to the Avalanche chain or to the Avalanche testnet chain. And you just kind of pass it flags to do that. And then a config file, Hardhat config file, which is going to be the actual endpoint that you feed it in. And so these people in, there we go. And then we also have our environment URLs here. And then you want to add your .env to your git ignore, because that will ensure that you don't actually put your keys in. Okay, so that was kind of a lot of stuff at once. We're going to actually see each of those files individually, but does anyone have questions on what just happened there?
What was the package you installed after Ethers?
Yeah, so it's at Nomadic Labs /hardhat.ethers. So this is a Nomadic Labs package specifically, which is the company behind Hardhat, I believe.
Cool, thanks, man.
Yeah, no problem. Okay, now let's take a look at our smart contract. So this is going to be our Solidity smart contract, and let me open this up a little bit so you can see the whole thing at once. Now, what's happening here is we are first going to set the version of Solidity. You always wanted to find this at the top, and actually the very, very top is a license. It's a GPL. And then this is going to allow us to console log some information from Hardhat when it's actually deployed. And then there's a contract, which is going to be a hello world contract. And in this contract, excuse me, and then in this contract, there's going to be a hello message variable. That's going to be just a string. And then there's going to be a constructor that allows us to feed in an input message and then set the hello message. So like when we deploy this contract, we're going to give it a little message. And when it actually gets deployed, then it's going to read that message out as like the hello message. And then we have two functions here to like interact with the contract, like one to read and one to write. So the hello function is just going to return the hello message, and it's just going to like give it back to us. So it's just like read whatever that message is that we set when we deployed it. And then the set hello message will allow us to actually change it. So we'll pass in a message and then set it to the hello message variable. And then also we'll console log saying changing hello message from this to this, which is this to this. Okay, does that make sense?
Yep.
Cool. This is very similar to just what you get when you run kind of Hardhat's like basic generate me a project thing. I changed a couple of the variable names because it is like originally is like greeting, and I find it to be a little bit confusing. This makes a little more sense to my brain, but that's basically what this is. And then same thing with the deployment script here. So this deployment script is going to take that contract, which is hello world contract, and then set it to the hello, initialize it as hello world factory. And then you run the deploy method and then feed in that message, which then sets this message to the hello message variable. And then you await it and then run .deployed. And then I console log two pieces of information here. One is the address of the contract that gets deployed, and then the signer of the person who deployed that. And the signer comes from, you give it your wallet private key in the Hardhat config. So in the Hardhat config now, we're going to do a couple things. We're going to have our Quicknode URL, and then we're going to have our private key. All right, just making sure I'm following all this. Move this down. Okay. Okay, now we got all that. There's a couple things I'm gonna have to do in terms of like key management, but before doing that, we have Quicknode, and this is how you get your endpoint. And there's a bunch of different ways you can kind of do this, but this is the one I'll be using because this is a company that I work for. And I'm going to log in here, and I already have an endpoint set up. And when you get it set up, you will have this HTTP provider, and then that has a private key on the end that you don't want to share. So this is why you want to make sure you put in your .env file, and then make sure your .env file is in your .gitignore file. So that's kind of like really important Git hygiene there. And then you're also going to grab your wallet key, which you get from account details, and you export your private key, and then you put both of those into a .env file. So right now, .env file doesn't have any of that information yet, so I'm going to stop sharing and do that very quick. Any questions while I do that?
Which company did you work for again? Was it Avalanche or Quicknode, or are they both the same?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So I work for Quicknode. Quicknode is a blockchain infrastructure company, and Avalanche is the blockchain itself that we're connecting to. So this question of like, what is a blockchain? What is a blockchain company? What is a company that works for blockchain? It's a very actually kind of confusing thing, but we are a provider to connect to various different blockchains. So Avalanche is one, Ethereum is one, Solana is one. There's like 13 or 14 of them that we offer right now. So our goal is just to give developers the ability to connect to whichever kind of blockchain they want to. So that's kind of the idea of Quicknode. And right now, demoing Avalanche, because this is one of our newer integrations, and it's a blockchain that we think has a lot of promise. And so kind of been like creating guides for it and videos, and then now going out like doing talks about it.
Right, great, thanks. I noticed like at the top of the coindesk.com website right now, there's a huge like quarter page banner for Avalanche. So yeah.
Nice. Okay.
Well, I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
The deploy script, the deploy.js script you've shown, is it for just deployment and testing for us, or this is something that we will have every time we need to deploy a contract, we will have the same thing? Because I noticed something related to testing the call as well on the same script, not just deploying. Yeah,
so the deploy script is fairly generic, and whether you're deploying it to like a test net or a main net is going to depend on when you run the deploy command itself. You kind of feed it some flags. So and then there's also a separate test file you would write to like actually test your contract. So the way Hardhat does it is it decouples it into the contract itself, the logic around deploying the contract, and the logic around testing the contract. Each of those gets their own files. Does that make sense?
Yeah, sure. So so we will need a deploy script for each contract we have, right?
For each, the deploy script will need to change based on the contract's name. Yes. So and then you could deploy a bunch of them at once if you're deploying like multiple contracts. I haven't usually, when I do these projects, I just deploy a single contract. So that's actually a good question that I should figure out how to do.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Okay, let me get back to sharing my screen. Let's see. There we go. Cool. Okay. So now let's go back to this. So we're gonna, now we have our contract set up and we have our endpoint and private key in there. We can run this compile script. And then this is going to compile the ABI, application binary interface, which is then the thing that you actually deploy to the network. And so this is where I was saying we feed in the -- network flag and then specify the Fuji network in particular, because that is the Avalanche testnet. So like how Ethereum has Ropsten or Rinkeby, they have testnets. It's the same with Avalanche, they have the Fuji testnet. And then after this, we're going to get this contract address, which you can verify here on Snowtrace. So this is the equivalent of like an Ether scan. And then there is our contract. All right. So now what we're going to do is we're going to use React to actually connect to this contract. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to do just like first we're going to set the contract address to the contract in our environment variable. And that is one last thing I need to do off screen. And then I also like this just like CSS preset that makes my website look just a little bit nicer. And let's change that to saying okay. And let me just walk through this code real quick. We're going to first do a use state. So if you've used React before, it's like your kind of React 101. If you've never used React before, then this might not make a whole ton of sense, but it's going to set your hello state to whatever you pass the set hello value. We then check for the wallet on the window object, and we have our fetch hello function here that will first check the account and then set the provider, and then you pass it your contract address and the hello world ABI. And this was generated automatically by Hardhat for us in this artifacts file. And then you have the contract with the hello function, which is the function that we defined in our Solidity file, which then takes the message output, sets to the data object, and then the data object you use on set hello value to set our hello value. And then you have a button, which on click runs the fetch hello button and the fetch hello function, and then displays the data in our hello object here. So now we got that all set up. Let's run our development server again. And then we're going to make sure that our wallet is connected. And then we'll click here. So now we have the hello from Quicknode message being displayed. And so that's giving us just the message that we set in our deploy script right here. And if we want to change that, though, we need then a setter function to go along with the setter in the hello world Solidity contract. And with that, we're going to put it under our fetch hello function. And the set hello function is similar, but also takes in a signer. And the signer then, because you have to confirm it on your wallet, and then it runs the set hello function and passes in the whatever the hello value is. And then we're also going to have an input and a button to run the set hello function. Okay, should be all good to go. Okay. So now it asks us to make sure we're connected and to confirm the transaction. And then that will take a second to go through.
So is that like a difference between like a read and write function? Why you
Yep.
needed to sign it? Okay.
Yeah, exactly. So basically like reads are free and you can always just read data off the blockchain because the data is the same. Like it's a replicated database across everyone's nodes. So everyone has the same data, is reading the same thing. But to actually set it requires like writing to it. And that requires like gas. Now we are not using gas right now because it's not testnet. So we're not actually paying AVAX. This is actually a step that I probably should have mentioned. I skipped actually is I didn't do the test faucet. So you have to first include your wallet address and actually give yourself some fake money to do this. So now we'll have a little bit more AVAX in a second after that goes through. And so that's why you might really want to use something like Avalanche instead of Ethereum, because Ethereum gas price is like really, really, really high right now. And you can do similar things with much less extra money on your transactions and whatnot. Okay, so that's kind of like the whole app. Now the last step then is if you wanted to say deploy this. This is pretty cool because if you're someone like me who kind of came up with like the whole like Jamstack world with things like Netlify and Vercel, this is extremely easy to get online because you basically just have to deploy this React app with the contract address. And you can set the build commands in netlify.toml, and it's going to run yarn build with Vite, and then put all the assets in a dist file, and then Netlify knows to just deploy that kind of bundle. So I'm going to do that real quick. Are people here kind of like familiar with Netlify? I'm curious. Have you used it before?
I have. I love it.
Great. Yeah, it's pretty sweet. I'm a fan for sure.
Yeah, it's a fast, easy way to get something online.
Mm-hmm. And then the only other thing you gotta do is just create a Git repo. And so for if people don't know what Netlify is, it's a kind of like a static site hoster. So if you think of something like GitHub pages on steroids, that's how it was first described to me by Brian Douglas. But basically you just like take a Git repo, sync it to Netlify. Netlify will then trigger a build every time you change something on your Git repo and then rebuild the site and then push the site up for you. So right now I just created a Git repo with this project. And then we're going to import the site here. And we're going to give it the name Getting Started with Avalanche. And then we have one environment variable we need to set, which is the Vite contract address, which was here. And that is what lets the front end know to connect to this contract in particular that we just deployed. And then also give yourself a custom domain here.
Question about the ABI. Do you have to deploy the JSON yourself as part of the app too? Or is that just done for you with through Hardhat or?
Once it's deployed, it's the contract is just out there and you only need the contract address to interact with it. You may want to commit it if you want like a record of that. So like you can kind of check the, the changes of that over time. So whether you kind of want to save that or not is kind of up to you, I suppose.
Okay. But the ABI, like that JSON file is like public with the contract. It's available to kind of
actually
from the blockchain or?
So the parts that you do need are these artifact parts, and those are bundled in your React app for you. So you have, yeah, these are, you do need this because this is kind of what is being imported into your,
Yeah, that's JSON
yeah,
file
so
right there, right?
yeah, so that's the part you need. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and so we also have some other information here. Okay. So let's go back to this. So now this is actually like online right now. And oops, I'm in the wrong browser. There we go. Okay, so then it's going to ask us to reconnect. This is a new site instead of like the original like local host we were on. So we're going to reconnect to it. And then here we see how it has that message that we had set the second time, because it's the same contract. So anytime you change the state, it'll be changed whether you're like deploying the front end or not, because they're kind of decoupled from each other. And then now we'll do from Netlify, and it'll ask you to then confirm the transaction. And then that will set the contract again. All right, cool. So that's kind of like the whole end-to-end example. Do people have questions about that? And then I'll share that link in the chat for anyone who wants it, along with the Git repo too.
Just to comment that it's pretty freaking awesome. And I mean, there's lots of new concepts in there, but these are the concepts you have to learn to do any of this stuff. So this is making it pretty easy. And where's this coming from? Is it Quicknode or Avalanche that's really sort of making this as easy as this, or is it all of these things? And
I think it's to me, I think the big pillars here are, there's the blockchain itself, so like that's, you know, obviously Avalanche. Right. Then there's the dev tooling, which is Hardhat / like the open source stuff, which is kind of Ethers, and then the actual like infrastructure coming from a kind of funded company, which is then Quicknode. So it's a little bit of all of it coming together, I think, in the right pieces. And there's a lot of other companies that are giving you like infrastructure to connect to blockchain. So this is I think that there's, you know, lots of people kind of doing this, but for me, it kind of makes me think of the same things I got from deployment platforms like Netlify or Vercel, which were giving me like a kind of leg up with what I could do with kind of the skill set I had. Because also someone who's coming into this as like, you know, just a boot camp student, like I didn't know a whole lot, but all this stuff is kind of aimed at someone who knows this type of stuff, because it fits in the same kind of mold, especially just because like the JavaScript ecosystem is just like so huge. So I think it's a little bit of all of that.
Right, great.
Yeah. Cool. Does anyone else have any other questions, comments, anything like that? Cool. Well, if anyone wants to find me online, someone might have just been about to say something, but I am AJC Web Dev on pretty much anywhere on the internet. And then if you want to check out Quicknode, you can go to quicknode.com, and then Avalanche, their website is AVX.network. They got kind of a whole bunch of sites all over the place. And yeah, I think that about wraps it up for me. Thank you everyone for being here. This is a lot of fun, and thank you. Shout out to the Codementor people who put this together, and Darren in particular did a ton of work here. I think Mohammed, are you raising your hand? You have something you want to say? Yeah, go for it. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think you might have said that while I'm not here. I came a little bit late. Could you mention something about the cost of the gas feed and the cost of the hosting the contract on the Avalanche blockchain compared to the other ones?
Yeah, so it's going to be all over the place for different chains. So right now, just the transaction costs and the gas costs for Ethereum can kind of range from like dozens of dollars to hundreds of dollars to like thousands at like very, very peak times of high congestion. So that's where it gets really high. Whereas with Avalanche, I'm not sure like kind of what let's see what Avalanche gas prices are right now. I know it's a lot less. So USD. Okay, yeah, so it's like fractions of a cent still. So yeah, it's just like it's like it's a huge difference. So there effectively are almost no transaction costs on something like Avalanche, and it's similar things to some other chains, but when it actually kind of starts picking up, that may change. So it's like that's also just because there aren't as many people using it, so it's could change over time. As of now, it seems to be a lot better set up for a lot more transactions that are going to be a lot cheaper. So yeah, it's an interesting thing to check out, and just like all the chains, the different trade-offs between them. It's very complex and multifaceted, and it's like a huge matrix of decisions that go into it. So you can't ever look at just like one number and say like this is better because this one number is better, because there's like so many other things to take into account. But I think that it's definitely one that for me, I've learned a lot just working with it. I think that the developer tooling around it seems to be like really sophisticated. So that is usually what I look for in terms of like whether I want to like bet on like an ecosystem, you know?
Yeah, thanks, Anthony.
Yeah. All right, cool. Well, thank you very much for being here. I think that'll about wrap it up. And just awesome. Cool. Thank you for that. All right. Yeah. And hopefully I'll be doing more of these because I really enjoyed doing this for y'all. So if you keep an eye on the Codementors, you may see some more events coming up either from me or maybe some of my co-hosts and co-workers as well. So thank you, everyone. Have a good one.
Thank you.